The last session is really an open forum. So what we wanted to do is just make sure we put something on the schedule that actually reserved the time to answer those questions that didn't get answered over the course of this last 5 days, or new ideas that came up that's like you'd like to hear about. And so really that's really the only thing on the agenda for the next bit, and so it's self-driven. And I guess the floor is open. Questions, thoughts, reactions? It's kind of a crazy thing to do, but go ahead.
My thinking is definitely not yet clear, but you mentioned earlier this morning something about the network covering problem. Mm-hmm. I am not familiar with that, but the little bit that you said made me wonder if you have an instance where you have somewhat large networks that you would like to use for some sort of online intervention, perhaps. Could something like this network covering problem, if you could explain it a little bit more, be used to reduce the size of the network in order to more effectively run an online or other intervention?
I'll try to answer both. So the question is, what is the network covering problem, and could it be used effectively to help solve the problems of some of the problems of network intervention?
Yeah.
So the network covering problem is there a set of nodes such that that set of nodes is adjacent to all of the edges in the network? And so there's lots of different network covers. So I could have obviously, if you have all the nodes, you have a covering of all the edges. So that's the simple one. And so that's usually uninteresting. So what you want to do is find the minimum size of the set of nodes such that that set of nodes would cover all edges in the network. And if you're interested in then in a transmission process, you essentially have an informant on all edges of the network. So in theory, that could do it. There's some good sort of results on how algorithms are finding this. It's not a particularly easy problem. There's often multiple solutions. And in fact, for those of us in the applied world, the actual graph theory problem isn't that interesting because you usually want to know that information in the context where you don't actually know the network. So what you would like to know is what set of nodes could I tap such that I have the highest probability of covering as many of the edges as possible. In the situation where I don't know what the network looks like, and that's a harder thing to do. But it turns out that you can do variants of that with things like the network scale-up sort of issues, where you sort of figure out what kinds of people are connected to other kinds of people, how many, and they can be used as informants to tell you things about the network as a whole or about the population as a whole. Or you can use sort of adaptive sampling designs to say, well, I've sampled Moody, he's not that interesting, but Moody's friends are better than him at informing the network, so then you go find those. So you're aware of some of those works by using the Friendship paradox. So if you have the beauty of these kinds of models from a public health standpoint is that we don't need often an actual network cover. We don't need that sort of level of honest truth. But we can just do better than random if we know something about the network. And so relatively cheap and inexpensive Evo network surveys or what are known as social capital inventory surveys, where you ask people how many of X type people do you know. You can sample either from a sentinel population that you have recruited and you keep informed, or you do a quick phone survey. You just did it on that. Will tell you something about the structure of your network, and then you can build models to play with those. So there's lots of ways you could do this. Now, I don't know of any public health department that's actively doing that, but in theory, one could. And so that was what I was thinking. So as for doing interventions, a lot of our work on this, there's I don't know if I actually said sort of Tyler's part of this project. It's one of these PIPs, which is a Predictive Intelligence for Pandemic Prevention program through NIS and NSF. Now, our program is engaged in trying to figure out essentially what can we do for the network intervention when you don't know the network. And so this is the kind of problem we're trying to play with.
This question for you is mostly logistics. I was able to get access to the Google Drive folder, but I know that during the presentations, and I know that this week, because for me, someone who doesn't do social networks all the time, because I'm trying to fire those, I can access the presentations, but I know there were some archive files. Are those also being
Yes.
shared?
So everything, we will get all of the videos of, so everything's not just been live streamed, but it's all been recorded, and that's actually been more stable than the live stream. So all the videos will be posted after we're done, ideally linked from the schedule, so you can just click on the schedule and go to the presentation. If there are markdown or other sample code bits, we will have those, and then all the slide decks will be provided as well. So everything will be there. It's just that they weren't all there ahead of time.
Thanks.
Please.
I'm kind of like a very general question. So, given like the prevalence of like the online so and the virtual relationships like nowadays, which is I think automatically is very easy from the online people to access the other instrumental use of the internet. So like how from some networks and how we consider those virtual elements or online relationships like not only in social media, like let's say how we from some network standpoint to incorporate those components into our social media.
So the question is, given that so much of social life has moved online into virtual settings of various and sundry sorts, including social media, but not necessarily just social media, are there principled ways or great way or good ways to incorporate that traditional social network data and analysis? And I think the answer in the broad sense is yes, there must be. In the bad sense is it's a little challenging to do. And so I think there's, there are folks who, and the main hurdle, I think, for a lot of these kinds of data are that the kinds of interactions that people have online are very unique. And so a Twitter relationship or a Facebook relationship or an someone who's following you on Instagram or something is not the same as a friend or coworker or colleague necessarily. And so I don't know that we have great understanding of what those data are. But the real problem is we don't usually have access to those data. And so one of the frustrations from a social network standpoint is that if you're on the inside, if you're a member of the club that has access to that data, you can often get amazing things and do amazing things with it. But the number of people who are allowed to be members of that club are pretty small, and the companies keep a very close eye on making sure that you don't say something that's going to hurt their bottom line. So that makes the kind of data that we might have imagined when these programs first came out, some of the early talks you saw where Muka and others were using just free-form Facebook data that anyone can grab, that world doesn't exist anymore. Those data are 20 years old, and Facebook's not going to give you all of Harvard's Facebook data anymore. That's just not going to happen. And of course, no young people at Harvard is using Facebook anyway, but you at least learn about their parents. So I think the question then is what do we do in the world that we live in with these kinds of data? And I think there it becomes another modality of data collection that you can get people's consent to give you, right? And I think this is where it intersects nicely with the kind of stuff that Peter was talking about. If you're already doing all the work to go in and sample and recruit people and talk to them, why not ask them for their Instagram handle? Why not ask them for their other social media features? Why not ask them to help you recruit in various ways? And I haven't seen designs like this, but it strikes me that there should be lots of opportunities to do that, to treat that as another way to augment the data set. We've done a very sort of minor version of this in a bunch of different studies, where you use people's electronic contacts as a way to confirm their identities in a snowball kind of sample. So you'll say, tell me the people that you hang out with most often, give me the last 4 digits of their phone number, and that becomes a really simple identifier in all contexts. But that's a trivial thing. Other people in the room have used these data. Should be a more of a, I don't want to be the star node here that's acting as a bottleneck. So, Carter.
Yeah, we've done over the years quite a lot with some of these things, but I want to push back a little bit on the question. I actually think, your question is really common, and we've got it from reviewers and proposed reviewers, whatever. But I think it's based on maybe a way of thinking that's not so productive. So I don't really agree with Jim's assessment that in terms of just looking at online stuff, and there was a wonderful Wild West period, and we published a bunch of stuff on Facebook. Sorry, you can't do it anymore because we did it in a period where most of them shielded it. You could just go in and crawl, and you can't do that now. And now you have to be in a club, and I don't trust anything that comes out of that anyway for a variety of technical reasons. So don't trust clubs because don't protect them. But I'm serious. What you can get out of Facebook, even a lot of people have access to stuff. The thing they get is very biased, and it's controlled by the company, and even they don't know how it's biased. And it can be changed dynamically based on them tweaking their algorithms. And so it's just, I think for science, it's almost all trash, to be blunt. Twitter is a lot better in that sense for now, but anyone can change it in a week. And it's very weird, right? It's only good for some things. So there's studying the online environment per se, and there's a huge literature on it. a lot of folks in computer science and electrical engineering, but I mean, it's vast. But I think that for most social network questions of an everyday sort, if you collect data the old-fashioned way, you ask people questions, then whether they're interacting online or by telephone or by face-to-face, it becomes much less of a critical issue, right? As long as you define the relationship properly when you ask people, who do you have the relationship with? They can tell you about the relationship, who they have the relationship with, and then it's just a mode selection thing. And I mean, we've always had people mixing across modes, right? In the entire modern era of network analysis, people had access to telephones. They had access to email for a chunk of that time, and we didn't freak out and go, oh my gosh, now we don't have telephone-specific things, so how can we ask people about their relationships? We ask them about relationships, and unless we care about the mode, we don't ask about the mode. We ask about the character. If you have a relationship through whatever medium you have it, and maybe many medium, we know that people mix over media in their relationships. So now sometimes you care specifically about the mode, then you do need to ask it in that way. But for a lot of things we care about, we care more about, what's the nature of the relationship with the person, what are the properties of the person, the geography we heard earlier about that. But we don't necessarily care how much are you doing that through Instagram or are you doing that through Facebook, whatever. So as long as you are asking questions, you ask the questions in a sensible way. The good thing about that mode of data, old-fashioned mode of data collection, is it is not vulnerable to the changing technology. And so you can pick up all those relations, however they're having them. And as the technology evolves and changes, as the character, that's another thing, I think Jen's point is really well taken. Different platforms have different inherent characters of interaction, like the nature of interaction. Instagram is not like the nature of interaction on Twitter. It's not like the interaction on Facebook. And people don't use them to do the same thing. Pinterest, right? You want to talk about all sorts of different communities. So if you really know what you want to get at and what you want to get at is a relationship, the ideal thing to do is still the old-fashioned thing of ask people and ask about the character of the relationship you want and let them choose the mode of explanation.
Elizabeth?
But you can't really get the context, like, are they pre-posting or are people listening to them, like how the electronic digital context is impacting them, right? You get how they're interacting in the context of like not really how the context is responding to them or how they're responding to the context in a more like platform-based way.
That's true, although you can ask them about what they mean. So you're limited to their egocentric report and the things they don't know. But that's true, but I push back again. Yeah, that's true, but that's no different from all the other things that we've always done in the field, right? Unless you know that we're sitting in this room and you ask the interaction, you would have no idea what the context of our interaction was. So our field is, so one level, you're right, at another level, we've always had this problem, right? Which is that we've always had this very thin, meager notion of what the micro-interactions were, and we knew something about ongoing ties, and then we assumed the micro-interaction. And that's not different in the online world from the offline world. That's the problem we've always had. It's the same problem we've always had. It's just that we ignored it before, and now you're sensitized to it. So it's a real problem, but it's not new.
They might be characteristically different. Like, I think they're not the same. I think your phone relationships and even your interactive stuff is going to be of a different character than what's happening when you're in a digital environment.
I think that's probably true, but the problem is still the same problem, which is that we never had a good measurement of what the thing was and what the micro-interaction was in the first place. So now we have another setting where we also don't know. But the state of our ignorance is still the same state of ignorance.
You can know more. I'm going to say it's all digital.
There's like natural language processing probably solves some of that when it comes to online context.
If you have the data, then we're back, you have to have the data.
I mean, like, just thinking about like how many messages they do.
If you have the data,
Yeah, I think we drill down that way.
right?
Or you do that with electronic settings too.
Yeah, if you have the data. But I mean, that's our point, right?
And I do think about just red tape. Sometimes that red tape is really thick.
It just depends.
Please.
I just think one of the things that we don't pay attention to a lot too are the cultural differences there, especially like with, using artificial intelligence or, I remember someone was talking about looking at like social, looking at facial expressions with digital image processing where
mean, I think it would be wonderful, for example, to test some of these hypotheses, some of these assumptions. So it would be great, for example, to do a standard sexual network study where we ask people about their partners and say, how does that match up with the dating app sites and what we learn from there? Like, would you actually learn anything new from that data that you wouldn't have learned from a survey? I don't know, but and because on the one hand, it feels like if we just had all of Tinder, we could like do an amazing job of the kind of models that Sam was talking about, but probably not that different. I mean, if we were able to sample smartly and give reports smartly, the model itself might take up most of what that data would do in a lot more efficient. But I think this is, as you can tell, a rich and pregnant area of the field, and if you I'm just grateful that there was this period of time for about 10 or 15 years there when every time you said the word social network, people assumed social media, and thankfully, like the language has shifted enough that I think people are not necessarily assuming that that one is a substitute for the other. Other comments or thoughts, questions, different areas. All right, well, this has been a lot of fun for me. I really do enjoy doing this week, as much work as it is. I couldn't possibly do it without all the help of our graduate student assistants. And many of you, in particular, have been interacting with Madeline. Madeline has been the one responsible for making sure that this thing came across. She had the disadvantage of doing it after 3 years of not doing it because we've been away. So all the implicit knowledge that we would normally carry from group to group had been lost. Gabe has been taking really a key job in taking care of the AV side of this process this week and the recording side, so thank you very much for that. Will, thank you so much for your work in keeping it all recording and all that going. This workshop is funded by an R25 mechanism through NICHD. We are incredibly grateful for their funding. They're the ones that have made all of this possible. It makes it possible for us to bring in, like I said, my fantasy football team of guest speakers to make sure that the people I'd love to be in the department with could actually be with me for a week. It's a very selfish thing for that side. But we get the spillover benefit of all of you get to learn from them as well. And so I really want to say thank you to NIH for this. If you get a chance and want to send our program officer a note and tell him what a great idea this was, it's never a bad idea. If it was miserable, I won't give you her email address. And I will be happy to help you with that. We do this jointly with IID, with DNAC, and with Dupree, which is the Duke Population Research Center. And we really appreciate all the work that they've done over the years as well. If you have questions or thoughts or comments over the course of this week, don't be strangers. Like I said, my learning model is one of continual reinforcement, that if you stop doing something for a while, it fades. And so, and we do our best to reach out from time to time and say, this is what we're doing. This year we were so grateful to get so many of our prior fellows back to visit and sort of really engage you. But that's a two-way street. So if you come back to us, we're more than happy to help and sort of engage with that. And so this is an open invitation for you to work with us and to sort of spread this model out to the rest. Next year we'll revert back to our sort of intro beginners kind of model. And so if you have particularly practitioners that are interested in sort of translating this science into practice, and they need to get the fundamentals of networks, be thinking about this person would really benefit from coming to the Moody's workshop. So keep that in mind over that next year, and then the year after that we'll cycle back through. So again, thank you all for doing this. We look forward to seeing you next year and over the course of the meetings the rest of the time.
Thank you.